All right. So here we go. It is now just about 8 o'clock. I am sitting here in my very quiet office and I am ready to start this live stream. I can't see who's here. So feel free to actually, maybe I can. No, I can't. So if you want to say hi, feel free to say hi. If you have any questions, we can go ahead and jump right in. Once we get a few more people in here, we'll start talking about the test and start talking about what we're getting into for tomorrow and Friday. Um, and we should have a good hour. And if we wrap up early, we'll call it good, and you'll be able to watch this later on. So I'll give folks about another minute or two to come in, and then we will get started. I'll be right back. Okay, so um, for the four of you that are here, we may as well get this party started. So the way this works is really simple. I'm here. I'm sitting in my house. You're there at your house or wherever you happen to be. And this is going to be driven primarily by you. We took time today and on Monday to review everything. I have given you kind of all the tools you need to get ready for the lab practical. And this is sort of meant to take the place of what we might do after school. Everybody's so busy. I'm so busy that I figure we can all take an hour out of our day to kind of make sure we're ready. I don't really have a formal program here. We're not going to, sort of go through the different parts of the rat like we did earlier today or yesterday, depending on when you had my class. But if you have questions about the format, about specific aspects of organs and organ systems that you may think we need to know, anything like that, there is a chat box. I think it's over there. I'm not sure if directions are reversed when I point at things, but on the right side of your screen there should be a chat window, and you can go ahead and type whatever you want to ask in there. I also have my email open, so if you would prefer to send an email with a question, I can answer that question via email. And if we sort of run out of questions, then we'll probably wrap up early, but hopefully, whatever we do discuss will be useful. While you're thinking of your questions, let me just remind you of sort of the format of the test. So, I'm not sure if all of my classes heard this, so I'll make sure that you understand one very important thing that you'll want to know. You do get a word bank. There is no note card. You don't get to sort of bring in information about the functions of organs and things like that, but you do get a word bank. So at the very least, you won't have to struggle with spelling. You won't have to struggle to remember what all the organs are because they'll be right there in front of you. Now, I will warn you that some of the things that are on there may not be used. there are some things that we've discussed that are difficult to identify. There are some things that we didn't necessarily cover, but I the word bank sort of covers all the different parts of the rat that you might have seen over the course of the last 2 weeks. So while it's not foolproof, it's going to be a really good resource to kind of help you recall what you need to do. So the way it's going to work is that there are 15 questions, and for most of them, you will need to identify either one or two organs. And so we'll start with everybody together, and I will basically be in the fume hood like I have been in class the last 2 days, and I will be pointing to organs and telling you what number to fill in. So I will, for instance, I'll point to the spleen. This is not the answer to number one, mind you, and I will say this is 1A. And you will write, hopefully, the spleen, the correct answer. And then there may be some questions to follow up on that. Those questions may include the function of the organ, they may include the system of which that organ is a part, that they may include um, some information about anatomical terminology, for instance, organs that are superior or medial or whatever to that organ. And really, that's about it. Those are pretty much the types of questions that might be asked. So I think the format will be pretty straightforward. The identification portion will probably take roughly 15 to 20 minutes. What I'll do at the end of that portion, I'll ask if anybody needs to see anything again. Don't hesitate to speak up, please. You're going to be your own best advocate on that. So if you didn't see something, if you weren't clear on something, make me show it to you again. So at that point, I'll show the whole class again, and if you're done, you can tune me out. Then, if you still can't see it, if you still can't quite figure out what it is, and the reason is that you don't know what I'm pointing to, then come on over and I'll show you. Like I said in class, I don't want the reason you miss a question to be that you didn't know what you were looking at. Now, if you didn't study and don't know what you're looking at, that's another thing entirely. That's on you. Obviously, the expectation is that you'll be able to kind of identify everything in there, but um, I don't want anybody to not speak up if you didn't know what I was pointing at, and that's the reason you got it wrong. So help yourself out. I always encourage you to speak up if something's not working. So that in on a test, a 90-point test, the single biggest grade we've had so far, definitely make sure you speak up. So that being said, there are, I believe, 15 total questions. They do have multiple parts, so there are, I believe, a total of 45 items, and each one of them is worth 2 points. So you can do the math. It's going to be a 90-point assessment. So biggest grade of the year so far. We'll have bigger. The test next week, I believe, is set to 100. So they're roughly equivalent, but this is a big grade, and it is a summative. So although it's my least favorite question to hear before any test, yes, you can retake it. If it becomes an issue, we'll talk about that process after we take it the first time. But obviously, I always want you to nail it the first time around. And I think that this will be pretty manageable if you put in the time over the next day or two. So, there are 10 of you. We hit double digits. Impressive, guys. So now I will shut up for a few minutes. And if you have questions, hit me up in the chat window over there. I might be pointing to the complete wrong side, but you get it. There's a chat window on your screen. Go ahead and hit me up with a question, and we'll see where the next 52 minutes lead. In the meantime, I'm going to hydrate. All right. So Shannon is our first brave question asker. Congrats on the win today, by the way. Um, the masseter muscle. It may also be pronounced masseter, just depending on who's saying it. Basically, a lot of these terms they have sort of multiple acceptable pronunciations. But the muscle, which is sort of located on the cheek of the rat, um, and you might imagine that your when you think about the muscles in your cheek, they're going to sort of open and close the jaw, and that's exactly the function of the masseter muscle in a rat. It helps them to sort of open and close their mouth, so it's very important in chewing and eating. Um, and really, that's about it. The other muscle that you'll need to know, and we may as well talk about that while we're on the subject of muscles, is the digastric muscle. So you'll remember that the trachea was visible with its rings of muscle. It's almost transparent, a little whitish in color. And on either side of that, you had sort of V shaped muscles right here, which were the digastric muscles, very important in swallowing. So if I ask you about a muscle, it will likely be, well, it will definitely be one of those two because those were the only two we've studied to date. When we dissect a mink in the spring, I know some of you who are squeamish about this cat will be really excited to spend 2.5 weeks with another animal. We will get much more in depth into the muscles and we'll actually be able to identify some of the skeletal muscles all over the body and figure out what they do. But for now, those two muscles are all we really need. So, Shannon, hope that answered your question. And I'm ready for the next one whenever you are. And don't feel like you got to wait for me to finish one to hit up another, because I am all ears. So, will there be questions about homeostasis? Asks Hannah Monahan. Thanks for chiming in, Hannah. Um, there will not be specific questions about homeostasis. I think I explained it in class. I may not have been entirely clear, but part of the reason I gave the homeostasis and organs assignment when I did was partially to give you some reinforcement with the functions of the organs, kind of a general function first, and then to talk about how those organs functioned in homeostasis. Now, I didn't really tell you that at the time, but what I was really doing was kind of planning in advance for next week because when we take our test, we'll be kind of circling back over homeostasis. But for tomorrow and for Friday for the lab practical, we're not really going to hit a ton of homeostasis. If you know the location and function and basic information about these organs, you're going to be set. Um, there may be some homeostatic function for some of the organs, and if you include that, I'm not going to stop you. But specific questions about homeostasis, we're going to save for next week. So thanks, Anna. Hope that helped. All right. So what else we got? Alyssa, um, do we need to know about different glands? Good question. So glands, I love. Oh, that was very confusing. Sorry, I just saw Jillian's question. Um, so while Jillian finds a laptop charger, we'll answer Alyssa's question. Do we need to know about different glands? The salivary glands are located in the oral cavity in the neck. It was probably one of the very first things you saw when you took your rat out because that whole area had the skin removed to inject latex into the blood vessels. So it was actually one of the first things you ever saw. So the salivary glands are sort of broad, they're soft, they're much larger. And then, so there are three pairs of salivary glands, two that are right here and then one off to the side. You don't need to know about specifically which glands are which. You only need to know collectively that salivary glands are found in the oral cavity and that they secrete saliva to help in digestion. Um, you should also be able to differentiate those from the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes are an important part of the lymphatic or immune system. They store red blood cells, they help them differentiate so you can fight infection. And there are many lymph nodes all over the body, but the ones that were visible were sort of just superior to the salivary glands. They were smaller, they were sort of oval shaped and they were harder. So there are a few ways you can tell them apart, and I'm going to make sure to make that clear distinction tomorrow and Friday, of course. So, to answer Jillian's question, your friend's very nice for lending you her laptop. Um, how many questions is it gonna be? It's gonna be, well, there are 15 separate questions. I believe 13 of which specifically require you to identify an organ that I point to. One is going to be a picture with several colored shapes, kind of like the sample lab practical station. And I'll ask you some questions about that. And one is just going to be kind of a general knowledge question. So there are 15 total questions. I believe there are 45 total items. Each one's worth 2 points. So the math is pretty easy there. It's a 90-point assessment. So you can just flake an entire station and you can still do okay. So my advice would be to obviously prepare as well as you can over the next 24 to 48 hours and trust your preparation. And then if you need to come back to a certain item, just kind of let it go for a while, move on, and come back to it later. The identification part you probably want to nail down early, but then you can always come back to any item later. Let me just double check that I didn't just get an email question. Okay. So Hannah's got another question about the uterine horns. We talked about this briefly. Out of 30 rats that were in the bucket that I received in the mail from Carolina Biological Supply this summer. And I'm not calling out Carolina. They're a wonderful company. I've been dealing with them for years. There was exactly one female. Normally, we look pretty extensively at the female reproductive system and not very much at the male because it's harder to see. However, this year, you should know that uterine horns are what rats have instead of a central uterus. You should probably know that female rats have uterine horns and male rats don't. But beyond that, I won't ask you to identify them, and you just kind of need to know generally that they exist in females. That's really about it. Chloe asks, will there be any other organs we will have to identify that aren't on the study guide? I really am not a fan, never was in high school or college, certainly not now, of making things artificially difficult. I don't think it's really reasonable to throw curveballs at you. So the study guide is it. I don't no, I double checked, and everything that's on the study guide is what you need to know. Really, you don't need to know too many details about the reproductive organs either, since we didn't really get to study those as much as we wanted. If there's so, Jillian has a question. If there's questions about a specific system and the organ has more than one system, do we need to list them all? The answer to that is no. I would accept either system to which an organ to which an organ belongs. So, for example, the pancreas. The pancreas secretes digestive enzymes that help break down a lot of things in the stomach and the small intestine. It also secretes hormones, insulin and glucagon, that help regulate blood sugar. So it is part of the endocrine system because it secretes hormones, and it is part of the digestive system because it releases digestive enzymes. You could tell me either or if that question came up about the pancreas. So Jack asked, Jack, by the way, is the first subscriber to my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe this video if you're so inclined. I hope I'm giving you value for money since you're not paying for this. Will there be a word bank for the different systems as well, or just for the different organs? The answer to that is no. There will not be a word bank for the different systems. I'm gonna spoil this for you. I got 2 likes already. You guys are awesome. Um, I'm gonna spoil this for you. You're not gonna need to write integumentary at any point. Um, it's a real hard word to spell. I'm a really good speller, and I can't really spell it that well. So in general, I'm going to be pretty forgiving on spelling on the systems, on the words that aren't on the word bank. Obviously, if it's on the word bank, I kind of expect you to check. But for the systems, I'm going to be pretty forgiving on that. So as long as you kind of get your point across, we're going to be okay. You should know the organ systems and the organs that are a part of them. It would be a really good idea to look at the introductory notes that we went over a while ago, the ones on organs and organ systems. The tail end of that set of notes takes you through each system, its general function, and shows a picture of all the organs in that system. So it would be a really good idea if I were you to kind of go through that and make sure you can keep those straight. That's a really good question, actually. That hadn't come up yet, and I'm glad you asked it. So, solid question from Jack. Solid question from everybody so far. Let me just double check that I've answered everything here. I think I've got it. What else we got, guys? We're about it's about 8:20, so the night is young. I suppose we could just have a staring contest for the next 39 minutes. I think I would lose that staring contest. So I've heard from 4 or 5 of you. That means that there are a bunch of you just working. Maybe that you don't have any specific questions, but if you do, feel free to speak up. We've actually covered a lot in the last 20 minutes, so good stuff, guys. Good questions all around. And another like. It's really nice to have fans, guys. I'm not gonna lie. Wow, wow. It's not a competition, Jillian. Okay. So another sip of water, and we'll prepare for the next third of our. All right. Good question from Hannah. So let's take some time to go through it since we do have time. Her question was, will we need to describe and locate different cavities? I know that you can see the questions on the side of your screen, but I figure I'll repeat them anyway for the sake of the video. Um, so the short answer is yes. You should know where they are and what organs they contain. Probably most of the answers that you would give would be limited to visible cavities. For example, we didn't cut into the dorsal cavity at all. The dorsal cavity, of course, is the one that contains the brain and the spinal cord, the organs of the central nervous system. And within that is the cranial cavity, which contains the brain, and the spinal cavity, which contains the spinal cord, enclosed by the vertebrae. Um, the two that we've talked about quite a bit, the oral cavity here contains everything in the neck. We don't talk about specifically the oral cavity very much because there's so much going on there. There's muscles, there's glands, there's lymph nodes that are part of the immune system. There's tubes that are part of the respiratory system, the trachea, and the digestive system, the esophagus. So it's hard to generalize there. But the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities, I think, are very important to make sure you have straight. You should know where they are. The thoracic cavity, obviously, is everything enclosed by the sternum And the ribs, I'm very sorry to my 4B class because I accidentally tore the sternum off one of the rats. That was pretty traumatic for me too. I really apologize about that. And the abdominal pelvic cavity, of course, is everything that is below that. So the way we found that during the dissection, you may remember, was to sort of feel for where the sternum ended, and the base of the sternum would sort of mark the bottom part of the thoracic cavity, and below that would be the abdominal pelvic cavity. I'm not going to show you my gut on this live stream, but you get the right idea. So everything enclosed by the ribs and the sternum is thoracic. We're talking heart, lungs, the thymus gland. The end of the trachea comes through here. And in the abdominal pelvic cavity, which is everything below, we've got all of the digestive organs with the exception of the esophagus. So we're talking stomach, we're talking pancreas, we're talking large intestine, small intestine, we're talking the liver right at the top of the abdominal pelvic cavity. We're talking the spleen, which is on the left side of the body. Um, Everything's backwards on my screen. I'm not sure how it's showing up on yours, but that's on the left side of the body. Remember, their left is going to be the specimen. Your left, or their left, the specimen's left is going to be your right. So if I'm pointing to something on that side, it might be the spleen. Then, of course, the kidneys underneath. If you see me sort of push the digestive organs to the side, probably I'm going to show you a kidney. There's, of course, the urinary bladder at the end of that, sort of the base of the abdominal pelvic cavity. So, in general, I think it's a good idea to, at the very least, know the location and the major organs found in those two cavities, since those were the ones that were primarily visible during the dissection. Um, does the Quizlet cover mainly everything the general questions will be? Um, yes and no. So, in terms of locating each structure, the Quizlet that I sent you today, as well as the Quizlet that was on Unified Classroom, which is basically a more comprehensive version of what I sent you today, they do really well with the identification. So you don't have a rat at home right now. At least I'm assuming you don't. If you do, we need to talk. And so the identification piece, where you actually need to look at a picture or an actual rat and point at something and identify it, that will be the Quizlet will really help you there. In terms of function, you've got the study guide at your disposal, which gives you sort of a good summary of the function of each organ. And I think that that's going to cover you pretty well there. So the combination of those two, in addition to maybe any pictures that you've taken, in addition to that sample lab practical station, just to give you an idea of the questions that I might ask, those would be, I think, your best study aids. And like I said before, it may not be a bad idea to go through the last part of those introductory notes, the part that covered all of the organ systems and the major organs within them, just to make sure you make connections between organs and organ systems, and kind of the general function of each. This is very dehydrating work, guys. This is a lot of talking. Okay, so we're about halfway through. It's almost 8:30. I think I found my new live streaming location. I used to do this in my dining room, and one time I did it right around sunset, and the sun was directly behind me, and you could barely see me on the screen. That wasn't my best moment. It's a nice quiet room. I got to put some stuff up on the walls. I'm looking for decorating advice here because the walls are still pretty bare. We've been here for 5 months and haven't really put anything up. But this is a good little nook here. I'm using my office for a really really valuable purpose instead of just sitting in front of the TV. So now that you've got that window into my life, I'm ready for any other questions you might have. I would also be more than happy if you guys are feeling good about things. It looks like our viewership's been pretty steady at around 10 to 12, so I think you've probably all been here pretty much for the duration. I'll give you a few minutes to kind of figure out any questions that you might have, and we might make this a nice tidy 35 minutes or so if nobody has any other questions. But like I said, I'm happy to answer anything else you might have. I might just step out for a few minutes, give you some time to think. So 2 minutes, I'll be right back, and we'll wrap this up. Thanks. Okay, so um, looks like there have been no more questions. So I'm back. Oh, hey, um, Alyssa. So the primary bronchus is a little beyond the scope of what we're going to do. The primary bronchus is a tube that branches off the trachea, goes into the lungs. We are not going to need to know anything about the primary bronchus. Generally speaking, you would need a much larger specimen. Like we would need to actually dissect a lung to be able to isolate that particular blood vessel. I have a funny story about a lung that I had to preserve for a test when I taught in Kenya, and basically the village butcher sold me a cow lung. Turns out cow lungs are real cheap. I got it for like giant lung for like $3, and had to preserve it. And it turns out you need to pour the preservative into the bronchi. That is the plural of bronchus, the tubes that go into the lungs. And that's the way you preserve it because then it soaks into the rest of the tissue. I just put a lung in a big trash bag, poured the preservative in, and left it there. And it rotted pretty quickly. So luckily, he was able to hook me up with another lung, and I did it right that time. And we had a test, and it was successful. So thanks for allowing me to reminisce a little bit there, Alyssa. But in terms of the function of the primary bronchus, as long as you know the function of the lungs in terms of gaseous exchange, I want you to be clear about both functions of the lungs here. I want you to talk about the intake of oxygen, which is very important for cellular respiration to make sure cells can get energy. And I also want you to make sure you understand that the lungs also expel carbon dioxide. We've talked a little bit in terms of homeostasis about how carbon dioxide, if it stays in the bloodstream too long, can make the blood acidic, can bring the pH down, can cause enzymes not to work. So it's very important that the lungs also be able to get rid of CO2 that it gets from the blood and keep the concentration of CO2 in the blood down. Um, so in terms of the function of that structure that you mentioned there, the primary bronchus, that's a little more specific than we need to get. As long as you got the lungs down, you're fine. All right, let's see. Let's see. All right, we're at the 35-minute mark here. So I'll give you another minute to kind of get some questions together. And I think even if we wrap up a little early, this has been a pretty productive 35 minutes. So good stuff, guys. You came with some good questions, some good energy. Gave me 6 likes, which I always appreciate. Um, and it looks like we're about to wind down. So I'll wait about another 30 seconds. I'll just keep talking about stuff, and then we'll all call it a night. Should probably all get to bed anyway. Got a big day tomorrow. My 2A class. You're doing it at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and then 2B and 4B. Your special day is Friday. So again, just to review, we're going to have 15 questions. Most of them will involve identifying at least one organ, probably talking a little bit about its function, perhaps the organ system to which it belongs, perhaps the cavity in which it's found, maybe use some anatomical terminology to describe its relative location, and then some questions perhaps about differences between males and females. So if you look at the study guide, if you look at the last part of the introductory notes to really nail down the organ systems and the organs that belong to them. And if you look at the Quizlets that I've shared with you, I think you're going to be in pretty good shape. I am. So so good question from Jillian to kind of piggyback on that. Do we need to use anatomical terminology when describing? This isn't necessarily going to be the same kind of thing as the pickle autopsy, which is where I really wanted you to kind of overuse anatomical terminology. Um, Mainly, you're going to be asked to understand anatomical terminology. That is, if I ask you for 3 structures that are lateral to the heart, you would know that lateral means toward the outside, and you would be able to describe 3 structures that were further out than the heart. The heart kind of is the most medial thing in the thoracic cavity, at least, so that generally it's going to be pretty straightforward. So as long as you understand those particular terms and can use them, you're going to be fine. You're not necessarily going to have to write them down. The most of the answers are going to be just straight up like, this is an organ. You don't need complete sentences. We're not going to get too crazy about it. So hey, this is actually a really useful question, unrelated to the practical, but while we're here, we may as well talk about it. Reminder to those of you who are planning to sign up for dual enrollment, there's still 10 of you here, so maybe some of you haven't signed up. If you are making out a check, you should make the check out to Southern New Hampshire University. I have the checks in my desk locked up. I'm going to turn them over to a representative from SNU on Monday. So if you are planning to sign up for dual enrollment, please, 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 please sign up by Monday. And if you're bringing a check, make sure it's made out to Southern New Hampshire University and make sure I have it by Monday. So, Jack, very timely question. Thank you for that. So, and Jillian, I got yours, so you're good. If there's nothing else, we're about 40 minutes in here. And I think we got a good 40 minutes of work in. Frankly, I'm impressed that some of you have lasted this long. Some of you may just be elsewhere and doing entirely different things. Maybe you're watching Say Yes to the Dress while you're doing this. My wife was just watching Say Yes to the Dress, which is a surprisingly good show. Why do I like it so much? So, on that note, because I'm getting a little punchy myself, I think we're going to wrap it up unless there are any last minute questions. Hopefully, this has been useful. We got pretty good viewership. I'll take double digits any day of the week. Hopefully, the 10 or 11 or 12 of you that have been here all along have gotten something out of this. Tell your friends how much you liked it. And let me introduce you to my cat. Please excuse all the boxes. There she is. That's Paka. Paka is Swahili for cat, if you're wondering. All right. So, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and study hard, get a good night's sleep, get a good meal in you, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. And we'll see you tomorrow or Friday. Good luck.